Hello, everybody, and welcome to another live chat about motorcycles here on YouTube. I am your host, Jensen Beeler of Asphalt Rubber, and joining me today is a man I'm very excited to talk to, Mr. Joe Karvonen of Kramer Motorcycles USA. Kramer Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jensen. I'm excited to be here and definitely excited to talk about everything motorcycle. So thank you for having me on.
For those who don't know, Joe is the, let's call you the American subsidiary, the American importer of Kramer Motorcycles. Tell me who you are, Joe.
Yeah.
Don't let me do it. You do it.
So we are the U.S. importer and distributor of Kramer Motorcycles Germany, Kramer Motorcycles USA. Along with our parent company, CSFAB, we are sort of a diversified company, and we do a little bit of everything in the power sports industry, from service and repair on that side of our company to some event stuff and different kinds of race organization stuff. And then, again, the large part of our company is Kramer Motorcycles, and we handle all the import, distribution, dealer relations, and all that stuff. So it's sometimes a lot to have on the plate, but it keeps it all entertaining. So.
Yeah, there's two big reasons I wanted to have you on the show today, Joe. One is to talk about the Kramer motorcycles themselves. Obviously, for those who don't know, I race a Kramer. I'm a big believer in this brand. I think it's pretty rad. But also, Joe, you're in an interesting position. One, selling a very niche brand in the United States, and two, you get to touch, I feel, all of the amateur racing series in the U.S. and even a little bit of Moto America. So you have quite a wide perspective on what's going on in the industry and what's shaking in the racing circles. And you and I have had, I don't know how many conversations, and you're very technically minded. So I think there's a lot to dive into here, and hopefully everyone who's tagging along in the chat room can pepper you with questions about the Kramers, about racing, about bike setup, about tuning. I think there's a lot of topics to go here. And why don't you start off and just tell us the story of Kramer Motorcycles? Where does this brand come from? How did it get started? What is it? What are the offerings that are available to riders?
So I'll keep the beginning part of it fairly brief, but more or less Marcus Kramer and two other friends of his had started racing motorcycles while they were working at KTM. They were all KTM employees. And they had decided they wanted to build a single-cylinder dedicated super mono, and they ended up building what was called the HKR, and they ran it under the HKR racing name, and that worked well. They had a pretty successful product. That was a heavily modified 690 chassis mixed with a whole bunch of different parts, and they ran that for a few seasons, and Marcus then went on his own and started Kramer Motorcycles. Had left KTM. He was in the R&D department and left to go full-time with Kramer Motorcycles and developed the bike we have today, actually, the HKR Evo 2. The HKR being a sort of homage to the original HKR Evo. And Marcus went forward to develop that bike, and we started bringing them in fairly early on. We were fairly fortunate to make some connections fairly early, and we're able to start working with the bikes as early as 2015, and then became the full-time distributor for them in late 2016. At that point, we brought in a fair amount of units and started to get a lot of traction very early on. And all of the bikes being the HKR Evo 2, which is our single-cylinder 690 powered KTM drivetrain. Through the years, the bike's developed quite a bit. We now have quite a few changes over the original Evo 2. And we can go into longer detail on all of that stuff, but the bike is pretty well developed by today. It's a turnkey package. We try to make sure that we set it up for the rider when it leaves our facility or when it leaves one of our dealers' facilities, to try and make it a true throw it on track and basically just go do a track day or do a race weekend from day one. Reduce that development time, give the rider more opportunity to work on skill and racecraft. The brand has grown quickly, as you know, but we've been able to kind of keep pace with it and further develop a new model, which is going to be coming out later this year, which has been delayed, unfortunately, with kind of everything going on in the world. But thankfully, we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, if you will, with the new GP2 890R, which is our new 2-cylinder version of our proprietary race bike theory, I guess. And it's using the new KTM 890 with the well, it's a quite a bit different electronics package than standard, but it does use an IMU Bosch ECU, along with a partnership that we've made now with AIM for data acquisition and dash, so full TFT dash and all of that. So the bike has traction control and all of the stuff that you would expect, along with our proven geometry and chassis technology. So we're extremely excited for that bike. It has been a bumpy road with everything going on right now, but we are making some good progress. And as of now, as long as we don't see too many more delays in our supply chain, we hope to see that bike towards the end of this year or early fall, ideally. So
Joe, you probably don't realize this, but I got back on the Wayback Machine today on Asphalt Rubber and went back in time, and I realized that I covered Kramer, well, what would become Kramer, almost 10 years ago to the day. The project with the 690 motor and the RC8 chassis and all of that. Yeah, it was kind of funny to see that was so long ago and where that bike has come today. Now, obviously, you've had to keep up with the developments that KTM has been making to that platform, and then you guys have had your own kind of updates along the way. Tell me about that process, because that's something that's really intriguing to me. For such a small brand, you're certainly not staying in one place. You're constantly evolving, and that almost seems counterintuitive because the resources that are available to you.
There is some challenges with obsolescence, and we have to walk a fine line as a small company between pushing the envelope of design and quality and development and being able to do so. And so we've made incremental steps, and we've kind of tried to make it where every 2 years we try and keep the bike the same. So our 14 and 15 mile years were our first gens, if we will, of the Evo 2s. We had some of our early swing arm designs, which a lot of people knew with their big welded aluminum style swing arm that had a very different linkage system and shock system in it. And we learned a lot with that. It still works very well, actually. So all the bikes that are out there that have that don't want to make it sound like they don't work well. They actually work really brilliant. But with having more tire options, we need more clearance. And with more clearance, we need a new swing arm design. So we were able to push that envelope a little bit with our engineering and develop a new swing arm on the bike and a new suspension system for the rear, which came out in 2018, which is actually what's on your motorcycle. And that's what just an example of some of the incremental steps we've been able to do and implement and improve the product and make it better. And one of the big changes we have for this model year, is the new partnership with AIM. So we're now using a LCD dash on the Evo 2 and then a TFT dash on the GP2. And that partnership allows us to really do more with data acquisition and more of the things that the rider wants to have for after the fact when they're sitting down across the picnic table trying to learn what they did wrong and what they did right. And so that's some exciting developments. And there's always been small steps. As you know, we've made some changes along the way with suspension in the front end. We now work with WP's closed chambered pressurized forks for all of our models for the Evo 2 and then the GP2, which is great. We've been able to stay up to pace with our braking components. We work with the new Brembo Stileno calipers and a new Brembo master cylinder for 2020. So yeah, it's challenging, but we find it as an opportunity to put together the best package that we can at the most affordable price possible.
Tell me about the challenges of being such a niche brand. I mean, it's one thing to be a small company and to have to source motors from another supplier and be that. And then it's another thing to be like, okay, we're going to do that and we're going to make sport bikes. And everyone kind of knows sport bike sales aren't doing so great. then you're like, well, as if that wasn't challenging enough, we'll just make bikes that can only go on the racetrack.
Yeah.
That seems like,
I mean, yeah, it's it's a niche within a niche within a niche. It really is. And that's both a challenge and a gift, though, because the reality is that the consumers that we work with, or the riders that we work with, are people who are looking for a tool to do a job and do it well. And they want a product that they can buy, set their sag, make sure the tires are up the pressure and up the temp, and go on the racetrack. And that's what we want to offer. And there's not a lot of that available in our industry. And I think there's a underlying demand for it. And I think that's a good thing. It's showing that in road racing, we don't need to have a license plate on the bike beforehand to make it a road race bike, which is very counterintuitive for a lot of the race series that are around the world, or especially in the United States, from my experience, that your super sport bikes are the norm, whether that's a Ninja 400 or whether that's a CBR 1000. Starting as a street bike is the logical thing. And we see it as an opportunity to capitalize on giving the consumer the product that they need and not what they don't need. And so you get better parts out of the box than what you're going to get on your street bike that you're going to have to build into a race bike. So it is a niche within a niche, but it's a niche that, frankly, it's already there. People are already buying street bikes and converting them into race bikes. We're just skipping all those steps and trying to deliver a bike that's what the consumer needs to go and do a proper track day or a proper race weekend.
Mm-hmm. Tell me what the typical Kramer buyer looks like, because I think it's really easy to kind of pigeonhole this brand into just being like a rich guy's toy. I know I've had a few conversations in the pits with people that come by and they look at it and they hear the price tag and they're like, oh, I could build an SV 650 for that, half of that price. And you're like, okay.
Yeah.
So where does that fall? Who are buying these bikes other than idiot motorcycle bloggers?
Well, I mean, that is a small part of our customer base, but I guess it is part of it now. But it's
Troy Seahan, we're looking at you.
I mean, I think that maybe says the product speaks for itself if the people who ride motorcycles on a regular basis want to own one. So I'll put a little feather in the hat on that one. But it's pretty diverse. We have, of course, being a little bit more of an expensive bike out of the box, it does bring forward more people who are able to buy a bike of that $20,000 price range. So I know that's a barrier of entry for a lot of people, but we have had people, quite a few actually, who are, I would say, average middle-class people. Because the reality is as much as we like to believe that you can buy a brand new, and I'm going to use new as an example here, because I think we can fall down the rabbit hole of saying I could buy a 1998 SV or 99 SV or whatever the first year was, 650, and build a bike cheaper. And I hope that you could. But if you're going to go buy a new bike today, and you're going to build it into a road race bike, and a similar spec road race bike, especially with pressurized forks, forged wheels, no lighting system, and proper lightweight road race bike, you're going to spend that kind of money. And I often have people that challenge me on that and say, no, that's not true. I can do it cheaper. And if you can, then more power to you. I'm a tuner and motorcycle builder myself. I have an extreme soft spot for doing it myself and all of that stuff. And I strongly encourage people that have the means to do so. But for a lot of people, they don't want to do that, and they see the value in buying something that's just ready to go. So, the average consumer is a little bit of everyone. Of course, road racing, motorcycles are not a cheap hobby. So the reality is it's, it takes some dollars to play, but, we feel like the bike is within reach of those who understand the value in it. And, we see that in our consumers. So, it's anyone from mid 30s all the way to their, honestly, mid 70s. So we've had everybody, in between. So, which is great.
HKR Evo 2 is 80 horsepower and roughly 270 pounds, and MSRP right now is what, 22.5?
Yeah, 22,495 is MSRP.
Okay.
For the Evo 2.
That, when I look at that segment, and that's racing, I mean, depending on the classes, that's middleweight twins, basically. That's FZ07s, that's SV650s.
Yeah, you're lightweight. I think I'll correct you on, just because a lot of other clubs, unlike I understand Ormra and maybe Wimra, I'm not sure, but they do like to shuffle the names around a bit on lightweight versus middleweight, or lightweight versus middleweight, excuse me. But yes, your SVs, your FZ07s, your twins class.
You know, I've seen what those bikes cost to get them to the front, and I agree with your statement that it's comparable. Where I have a hard time is with the GP2, where you have the 890 KTM motor, the parallel twin. I believe you guys have it tuned to about 130 horsepower, 280 280 pounds.
No, the bike, we are keeping the specs on the final trim a little bit vague right now, because we are doing some final componentry on the motorcycle. But right now, it's going to be around 300 pounds. Okay. Which still 300 pounds, 120, 30 horsepower, it's pretty good.
But with a price tag of what?
32,450 US. So it's not cheap. But and I think there's a strong but there. It is very extremely well developed. I think one of the disadvantages, of course, you look at the 890 at, don't quote me, 11,000 something. Does that sound about right?
Oh, for the street bike, yeah.
Car. Yep, the street bike.
Just under. It's like 10.7.
Yeah. Okay. So, I understand, how do you get to that price point? The big difference is, the only thing we're using from the 890 is really the engine. And so that's the big difference, between the two, when it comes to what are you getting. Now, the 890R is a brilliant motorcycle. They did a great job of developing that bike, and the 790, Duke was a great bike too. We know that a lot of the components on that bike are value engineered. It's built to a price point, and it's a good motorcycle for the price point. I don't want to discredit it at all. But there's components on it that leave you wanting more. And so when we started looking at developing the GP2, we used the same design concept as we did with the Evo 2, and saying we don't want to really compromise anything. We knew that in releasing the bike, the one that was going to excel the most from experience would be a high spec version. So we had on our Evo 2 the R spec and the S model. We've since dropped the S model for this model year due to lack of sales. And reality is that most people want all the stuff. And so with the GP2, we made the decision that we're going to come out first and concentrate on the R spec level of that motorcycle. And the other options, and looking down the road, we are exploring the idea of building a lower trim on it, but we don't see how we're going to get there yet. And unfortunately, right now, one of the big challenges right now is the whole coronavirus shutdown is hampering on some further development on that project. But we know that most people are going to want everything that comes on that bike. So with the AIM TFT dash, you're getting the ability to do data acquisition through that. You're getting all of that capability that is not standard on a street bike of really any, well, not I shouldn't say any kind, but not many. And you're getting, of course, all of the traction control and IMU based rider aids, and then our pressurized fork system, along with forged wheels. And we are also using now on that bike the Apex WP shock. So it's a much nicer shock. It's a very high end unit. So we didn't really cut any corners. And when you don't cut any corners, it does get expensive. But I think if you step back and say, I'm going to build the best, let's say, Super Sport 600 or Super Bike 600, I should say, that I can, you're going to well exceed $30,000. So I think we still fall into the same conversation, just at a different level of, if you're going to get to that, you're going to be spending that kind of money. And I think it's a small select few who can maybe speak to that more directly, but I know people who have spent up to $40,000 on a R6. So it is possible. And so it's going to be a bike that may not be for everyone, but we're very proud of it, and it's going to be extremely competitive. So
the business person in me goes and they look at the different segments of the motorcycle industry, we call it the white spaces on the board, right? The places other brands haven't gone. And Kramer seems to have been very creative on the white spaces that it's found. You know, if I'm brutal in my journalistic opportunity, the HKR, it's a cheater bike. You know, you guys found this little weird rule that most clubs have where singles are open displacement and they get to race against all sorts of underpowered bikes. And people are thinking like, oh, well, they'll just be supermotos coming out here or whatever. And you guys built it's effectively been a class killer for a lot of clubs.
Yes.
And then you're like, hey, we'll go race some 600 super sports, but we'll use a 900cc twin. Maybe you can shed some light for me on just like the ethos behind those decisions and kind of like what's been going through Marcus's mind and how like you view the market when you're kind of relaying what's going on in the US back to the headquarters in Germany.
Well, I mean, you know, we have some constraints. Obviously with the 690, it's 693 cc's. It's a single, and that's what it is. That's the drivetrain we use. Some clubs let it race in singles classes, which is your 450s and 500 singles or what have you. And of course it does really well there. But most clubs have pushed it up into that twin 650 twin, 700 twin class, which is very competitive. I think it's to put it on the podium in a competitive segment or class that has a lot of very fast racers and well-built bikes. You got to work for it. It's not going to be a cheater bike there. It's going to be a fair competitor. Now the GP2, it's hard to say. We know what it does for lap times. We know the data. We know what a pro rider can do on it. We know what an average rider can do on it. But that's always different when you're putting it in the hands of maybe an amateur road racer or, you know, a professional road racer that's not a development rider. So we'll have to see. Now, what it means for classes that you can race it in and what it means for different clubs you can race with, we'll find out. Some clubs allow up to an 899cc twin based upon the Ducati 899 twin. That bike has been allowed in 600 classes. So the GP2 890R slots in there. Some other ones have twin dedicated classes that are unlimited displacement twins or different displacement caps of twins. It is kind of all over the board, frankly. But really, when it comes back to the idea of it, we're not really worried about fitting within a class. We just want to build the best bike we can build with the drivetrains we have available. And we know the drivetrain well on the 690. We know what it can do, and we feel like we've built the best road race bike we can with that. And the 890 was just trying to do the same thing, or is trying to do the same thing. We'll have development work to do as the project progresses and we move forward with that bike, and we'll get more of them out in the marketplace, and everybody will learn together on what the bike's capable of doing. But at the end of the day, what we really wanted to do was build a good road race bike. And not necessarily not care about displacement, but kind of not care about displacement. It's not arbitrary, but it kind of doesn't matter, because what I want is someone to be able to buy a machine that is built to do a job. And I think a perfect example would be talking about the 350 motocross bike. There's not really a spot for a 350 motocross bike, but they build it anyways because people want the lightweight of a 250, but the performance of a 450. It's not for your pro AMA dirt bike racer. It's for your weekend warrior that wants to go out there and have a good time. Is the GP2 exactly that? No, but it's with the same concept where we want to have a bike that's fun to ride. It's easy to ride. It's intuitive. It's a low amount of effort when you're on the track. It's not going to beat you up where you're out. And it's just going to be a true tool to do the job. And it is a little bit challenging with the race classes, but at the end of the day, it's not something we really lose too much sleep over. So it's about building a good motorcycle.
Yeah, it's funny to hear you talk about it that way, because I would say just about everyone else goes, if that's the bottom up approach, everyone else is kind of a top down, where it's look at the classes, look at the constraints, look at the segments that have kind of been created, from a de facto basis, and then build a machine that, slots into it that way. I mean, it's kind of weird to me to see the 890 coming out and having it be almost close enough to run in a twins class, but not. I mean, was there a discussion there, or is there an internal dialogue to say like, hey, we should have a follow up to the 690 that can compete, on a more even footing with some of these twins bikes, and it should be this, displacement? Or is it, let's go hunting for 600 super sports with a twin?
Well, we've kind of looked at a few different ways. One of the big challenges and why we don't get too worked up about the classes is because, and this is maybe something I could go on way too long about this side of the topic, but we build rated race bikes for road racing. They don't carry a standard DOT street legal VIN number. They are a dedicated competition vehicle. Because of that, we can't run super sport classes. And being that we aren't constrained to super sport classes, why bother being constrained to super sport classes? It kind of, a lot of that goes out the window. And we're really dedicated just, again, building the best bike that we can. There's been discussions of trying to figure out ways of making the bikes fit better within certain clubs and certain classes. But because we are going to be building those bikes to fit within classes or rule structures that may vary greatly around the world, especially in the US, because I've spent way too many hours paging through the rule books of all of the clubs in the United States, and they are all different. None of them are the same. And it's extremely frustrating because it's just so all over the board. And so that being said, we don't see a lot of point to try and build the bike to qualify for, say, I'll use your local race clubs, ORMRA's twins class, whatever it might be, or 600 class. If we built a bike that just fit those rules, it might cover a lot of them, but it might not cover all of them, and it might not still cover our ability to go and race something like Moto America or BSB or something of that nature. So it is sort of pointless in a certain aspect for us to spend a lot of time developing the bike to fit a class when it comes down to that. They're all different, and also a lot of them are super sport based or super bike based, and at that point we're already out, which is extremely frustrating, of course, for us, because we feel like we could be good competitors, but it's kind of makes it not worth the effort, if you will.
Correct me if I'm wrong, though. Wasn't the 890 developed primarily for the BSB twins class?
So yes, originally the 890 was developed for the BSB, which is actually called the GP2 class. It is still a class that exists. BSB, and Marcus could speak more direct to the exact what had happened here, but BSB had a slight bit of politics, I would say, that came into play, and the racing, the racers within that class were not happy about the GP2 being allowed to be in there, even though it was allowed to be in, and then right before the season started, it kind of got booted out, which hasn't been really too bad because there hasn't been any racing, but nonetheless, we were excited to be able to compete there because based on performance index, we would have been right there. It would have been a very competitive machine in that class, which is it's basically Moto 2 bikes is the best way I could describe them. They're 600 super bike style or super sport engines and custom chassis is what that class is. And we would have been extremely excited, and hopefully that changes in the future. I know that we put a ton of effort and time and engineering into developing the bike to fit within that class, and make sure that we would meet their minimum weights and all of that stuff. And unfortunately that didn't come to fruition, but Marcus could speak better to probably politics that came into play on that late in the game, but that's where it stands up as of now.
Joe, I want to switch gears a little bit and kind of pick your brain a little bit on a topic that you and I have probably had too many conversations about, but there's this interesting thing with Kramer and the brands that you're working with. You have Dimag wheels, you have WP suspension, Pirelli tires, and a high price tag. And it's interesting to me to see racers kind of go shopping for the different brands. They want to see Olin suspension, they want to see Marchesini wheels, they want to see, X, Y, and Z, and the mental side of it. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the differences that you see between different components, why Kramer kind of landed on the parts that it did, and then maybe we can get into a conversation about kind of what's in between the ears on a motorcycle racer.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. As a motorcycle enthusiast myself, we are programmed to see certain brands in a certain light, and they are good brands. I don't want to give any impression that Brembo brakes or Olin suspension or Marchesini wheels or OZ or whomever is not good quality, because the reality is we use Brembo brakes. Like I said, we used the M50s prior, and now the Stilema calipers, and we're now using Brembo master cylinder, and it's good quality stuff. I mean, it really is held at a high standard for a reason. Is extremely good. There's other brands out there that are as good though, and I don't want to discredit any of those. With our wheels as an example, we have a wonderful partnership with Dimag. They're a brilliant company. Their wheels are extremely good. A lot of people see them in an old light because, Dimag, that's that old company from back in the day. Well, yeah, they've been around a long time, and I think that's a good thing though. They've been able to build up a lot of technology and knowledge and fitment and experience. And it's one of the more popular wheels when you start looking at, let's say, like Irish road racing in Isle of Man. You see a lot of Dimag wheels because they're extremely durable and still extremely lightweight. So we're fortunate to work with them. And, again, it is a perception thing where we're so programmed to see that nameplate of whatever and expect that as a standard. And when you actually start looking at the specs, you look at the weight of the wheels, you look at the durability of the wheels, you look at the certification of the wheels and all of that stuff, and you realize that they build a good product. And looking at our suspension partners, WP isn't known, for their road suspension. And I think it's not only a U.S. problem; it is a bit of a global issue. They aren't well known for their road suspension, but KTM, of course, is using WP and GP with their whole campaign, and they have a ton of knowledge. They're extremely high end products, and we're excited and fortunate to work with them. It's a great partnership, and it is a bit of a perception thing though, because in the U.S., your trackside tuners are programmed to know the ones like Olin's and K-Tech and Penske and what have you. The list goes on. And there's nothing wrong with any of those. They're great. I personally have had them on plenty of other motorcycles and have no complaints. But it's just an education thing. WP does things a little bit differently, or they use a little different tools or a little different spring size or whatever. And when you get into the nuts and bolts of it, and you actually have one of those forks spread out on the bench and you're looking at it, it's extremely well engineered, and it's just done a little differently than what others are used to. So I see where you're coming from on it though. A lot of times people look at our partnerships and kind of scratch their head a little bit, but we look at it as an opportunity to show not only what we can do with their components, but what they truly engineer them to do. So, I think it's different, but good.
You and I, though, we both know how conservative racers are in terms of, I want to try and say this politely. in terms of what they work with on the track. But it's funny to me because I come across this all the time, especially at the track day level, where it's like, I use brand X for my tires, and I'll always use brand X, and I use it on my leader bike and my 600 and my 300 and my go-kart and whatever it is that they're doing.
Exactly.
And it's that same thing with, and I think we're trained like this as consumers at the consumer level with street bikes, where, you know, there's like the base model bike, and then there's like maybe that tier above it that has, you know, let's be honest, it has Brembo brakes, it has Olin suspension, it has forged wheels, usually from Marchesini. And we're kind of trained in this mindset. And so, like, you and I both know this exists. This is the state of the market.
It is. That is.
And yet you still go and do this other thing where, you know, like, you're going to sell a $20,000, $30,000 bike with the, you know, wrong brands on it. And let's say me as a consumer is going to sit there and go like, oh, so I'm still having to spend like $5,000 or whatever when I get this bike. Like, I don't know. It seems like you guys are taking on a burden you don't need to be taking on.
Well, yeah. And I mean, there has been an ongoing joke within the company. So much as so, there's been some pranks and some jokes here and there about, oh, we should put Olin suspension on there or whatever, and all these things. And, you know, at the end of the day, though, what we work with is good stuff. And we know that it's just different. I think someone who's buying a Kramer, though, isn't buying, they don't want that same experience necessarily. Sometimes they want good. They're expecting high-end quality, and we expect to deliver high-end quality, but they don't necessarily get so hung up on whether it's got gold forks or black forks, or if it's got, you know, this wheel or that wheel. They expect quality product, though, and we see it as an opportunity more so than as a barrier. And I understand that the consumers see that. I mean, I'm guilty of it. I've built other race bikes for myself and for others, and what have you, that utilize all the other aftermarket brands that we spoke about, from Olin's to whatever. And it is often, you know, just a perception thing. You know, I could buy a shock from Olin's, I could buy a shock from K-Tech or Penske or whatever, and at the end of the day, that shock's probably still going to be better than me. And the thing is that we know that the product that we put on is at that level. It's at that bar, and it's just a little bit different from an education standpoint. And it is challenging, of course. There are some people that refuse to race a motorcycle that doesn't have gold forks on it. And I talk about the suspension specifically because that's probably one of the big hot button items for us. Is the Olin suspension conversation, and it's good. Don't expect me to say it's not, but it is more of an opportunity to explain to consumers that there's other options that are just as good, if not better, in some ways. So
I think for some racers, it comes down to support, and that's a bigger deal on the professional side. Obviously, that's why we see certain brands dominating, you know, the top levels of the sport, because they have just a wealth of data that they can bring to the table, and that's probably a different conversation. But, you know, at the amateur level, you know, at least one of the hurdles I've seen, especially having a bike with WP suspension, is suspension guys looking at it and be like, "Oh, I don't know what to do with that." You know, if you had a different fork, if you had a different shock, you know, yeah, I can work with you. But this thing from Austria, I don't know what this is. And that's
exactly. And I think that's the biggest barrier. I really do. I think it is that. But that's a solvable barrier. That's something that education for the consumer and education for the tuners that are helping them can solve very easily. Because one of the things, like with our new closed chambered forks, when you buy the bike, you get the fork cap tool with it. So you have all the tools you need to change a spring and all of that stuff. So it's not like you're left high and dry without the knowledge or the resources to work with that suspension and set up your preload and set up your sag and all that stuff. It's all extremely intuitive and simple. It's an independent function fork. You don't have any weird aspects to it really. And a tuner, a trackside suspension guy, just needs to be open-minded enough to understand that a shock, to most extents, is a shock. They might work a little different. It might have a little different valving, but you're still moving fluid from one part of a thing to another. It's not necessarily out of the norm to understand. Same with it goes with a fork. So it does take education, but I would say, as an example, in the Pacific Northwest, there's been some tuner shops that have embraced it actually, and done extremely well with it, and have actually developed some tuning packages for some of the people in the Pacific Northwest for suspension setup for them. So it's a perfect example of where they just needed to get a little education on it, and it was all fine. It's all kind of the same stuff inside there.
I still think you guys are trying to paddle up creek with one paddle, but I wish you the best with that.
I've been told that before, but it's still good stuff. So
tell me about the racing landscape in the US right now. Like I said at the beginning of the show, you have a very interesting perspective in the sense that you get to touch every series that's basically going on in the United States when it comes to motorcycle road racing. So you teach me what's going on. What's the word? What's the state of affairs?
Well, right now, I'd say there's
I'm gonna just sit over here and drink my Mountain Dew. Just educate me.
I mean, well, I do not want to be the end all for any of this, but like everyone, we're dealing with some weird times. The whole motorcycle industry is upended, just like everything else is. And of course, as everybody knows, as motorcycle enthusiasts, motorcycle race enthusiasts, we haven't had a whole lot to watch on TV. We're excited to see Moto America firing back up and all that stuff. But the amateur level, we are starting to see some clubs coming back online. One of our local clubs, the Central Road Racing Association out of Minnesota, they're coming back online this weekend, of course, with some new requirements about social distancing and minimum amounts of people and all that kind of stuff. And it's going to be a different world. I plan on attending myself, and it's going to be different. But we're excited to get back out there and just be back at the track. And we're hoping that other parts of the United States are going to be able to do so again soon. And we're going to start seeing things go back to normal. But we'll say, ignoring the whole shutdown and coronavirus, road racing in the U.S. is very diverse. We've raced with CVMA in Southern California. We've raced with ORMRA, WIMRA, ARMA, which has been fairly common for us, actually, weirdly, with the Antique Motorcycle Racing Series, which is very counterintuitive. And of course, the CRA, and we have a very good dealership in the New England area, Seacoast Sports Cycle, who does very, very well with the race series up at Loudon. And also with WIRA and CCS, we've had some of our bikes competing there. Actually, just had a bike do very, very well this weekend in the WIRA road race. So we are seeing that every club is active. Just in general, we don't think that road racing is as good as it was maybe 20 years ago. There was definitely a much stronger participation in road racing in years past, but it's not in a terrible spot either. I know there's a lot of pessimism in all of it, and there's a lot of fear, and there's uncertainty sometimes with the state of affairs with clubs and organizations, because they always seem like they're teetering on the edge. But I think the reality is that the dedication of club members or participants is there. They want to do the thing, and they're going to step up and do what they need to do to go and participate. So I don't fear too much for most clubs and organizations at this time. I think everybody's doing fairly well. And I think post coronavirus that road racing is going to come back strong and going to do well. Road racing in general in the U.S., like I said, is extremely diversified and it's kind of all over the world. When it comes to the rules, as I said earlier, but the nice thing is there's plenty of diversity within those clubs. So there's no shortage of racing that can usually be done with any motorcycle, whether you're riding a Ninja 250 or you're riding a BMW S1000. There's usually no shortage of stuff you can get out there and get on track. So it is in a weird spot right now, but I don't know. To be optimistic, I want to say that we're going to see blue skies here. And hopefully not too much longer.
Looking at the different clubs, and you don't have to name names, but I'm curious, the clubs that are, let's say, doing better than others, either financially or grid size, whatever, what do you think that it is that they're doing that, say, a club that's struggling is not? Or is that just luck of the draw?
Well, there could be some luck of the draw to it. There is that factor of geographics that can play into that. But that being said, the most successful clubs that I've seen are the ones that have the least amount of barriers of entry. And what I mean by that is they have the either the highest volume of races that happen a weekend, so like lots of them. Our local club, I would say, sets the gold standard for the amount of races they can crank out in a day, which is great though, because that means a ton of people are there. It means a ton of people are participating, and there's a lot of bikes on track, and there's a class for everyone. And so that's a good example of where there's not a lot of barriers. If I have a Ninja 250, I can still race competitively. If I have, as I said, like a leader bike, I can race competitively, and not just one race a day. I could race, let's say with a 600 Super Sport, I could race 3 600 races off the top of my head. I could race 3 750 races. And if you really want to go for gold, you could race 3,000 races. You can race, 9 races in a day. Let's say, if you really, really want to go for it on one 600. Now, how well would you do? I don't know, but you could, and they would allow you to grid up. So that's something I've seen actually help a lot in organizations. Clubs that I've been to that are very limited on the amount of races that a bike will fit into, or you just run a very small amount of races to begin with in a day, usually don't have as high participation numbers. Now, I don't want to draw a direct correlation between that and their overall participation. I know there's many other factors that come into this. It's not an inexpensive sport, but I don't think that any club, and it's just my opinion, should have any barrier of entry, whether that's for the person or for the bike that they have. Again, that means anything. It means if you got a wickedly super bike built SV650, you should be able to race that bike. Some clubs don't even have a class for you anymore, where they only have super sport classes and things of that nature. So that, I think, is not a good thing, and there shouldn't be any things that are creating a wall for people to get out and get on track. So the more diverse, the better, in my opinion. And I think that's it plays a huge factor in the successful, just a club being successful.
Where do you see the kind of tectonic shifts being in terms of what classes are popular and which classes aren't? Or is that something that changes too much by location?
It is geographic. We see less participation with your large displacement bikes, your 1,000cc motorcycles. This is one of the things that we often talk about our own brand, with comparing against someone who starts out and thinks they're going to go race a 600 or race 1,000. Maybe they aren't quite up to that pace yet. Maybe they're a good racer, they're a good motorcycle rider, but going 200 miles an hour on 1,000 maybe isn't on their checklist. And because of that, a lot of people are shifting to smaller displacement bikes and away from that big high displacement, motorcycle. It's challenging to ride. It takes a high level of skill now, with most full out super bikes making 200 horsepower or whatever. You gotta be on your game to race one of those. It doesn't matter if it's big track or a little track. And then they're expensive to run. I mean, if you want that thing to be hooked up, you're throwing tires at it like candy. So it's challenging. So I see a lot of people moving away from that and in racing your twins or your 600s more so. 600s are still popular. It seems like everywhere I go, someone's got a whole fleet of 600s usually because they're affordable. There's no two ways about it. You can pick up a used R6 or ZX6R or what have you for not a lot.
I was just going to say, is that because I can get on
go.
Craigslist at any point in time and find a beat up R6 for like $1,000?
Correct, R6. Exactly. But the R6 is a great motorcycle. It's the best. My opinion, it's one of the best 600 inline fours probably ever built at this point for mass production 600. It's great. They also have stayed the same for a long time, basically. Too. I mean, they have changed them a bit here and there. So you buy an 06 or a 12 or a 16, and there's some changes. But if you're good on an 08, you'd probably still be at the front. So
careful, Joe. If Yamaha's listening, they're going to get very upset at what you just said.
Yes, I know. I'm just ruining their marketing campaign. I'm sorry, Yamaha. But the thing is that that class is easy to get into, and so we do see a lot of it. And it's also a perception thing. It's that win on Sunday, sell on Monday idea of motorsports racing, where you see a 600, super sport bike. You see that racing, you might want to go and do that yourself, and that's great. It's great for the industry, and I love that about it. But it's maybe not always the right choice. Sometimes I prefer to see people who aren't of high skill or high knowledge get out there on a small displacement bike like a 400 Ninja or KTM RC390 or something as a more of a truly beginner's road race motorcycle, and develop their skills before jumping onto something a little bit more powerful. And a lot of times I see people quit road racing because they get a 600 and they go out there and they maybe have a bad off, they crash, they have a ride off, something bad happens, or they just can't afford to feed the thing tires, or they're afraid of it. And I've had some people that have been honest that said, I'm afraid of something that goes 160, 70 miles an hour. That thing's pretty dang quick, and it's a lot, and for a lot of people that's just a little too much. So I feel like that's kind of the most common class that I see sort of boil up to the top all over the U.S. And it does have a lot of variance, though. It is all over the place. So
it's funny you mentioned, kind of the perception that we have as riders. Last week I had Walt Siegel on the show, and he was kind of giving Americans a tough time for, let's say, our egos. This idea that, if you're a real American man, you get on that super bike and you go get your 200 horsepower and you go do the thing. And I mean, yep. I'm that guy. I am that guy. Like, I'm totally guilty because I think my third bike was a leader bike, and my, until I got this Kramer, my dedicated track bike was an R1. And I can tell you as an older and wiser rider now that I know it didn't make me a better rider, because it spoils you in a lot of ways. And it's interesting to me. I think we're at that precipice, though, where people are kind of catching on to that. One of the ideas I keep kind of coming back to is how this twins class feels like it's replacing the 600cc class in a lot of ways, where you have very affordable bikes, very affordable street bikes that are affordable to ride. They're cheap to maintain, and they go pretty quick. You can make a 100 horsepower machine out of these without too much work. And doing it at a fraction of the cost, maybe not with the used market the way it is, but certainly from the new market. And I'm kind of curious if, if Kramer has been able to ride that wave because of the HKR kind of fitting in that area, but also too, if you see kind of a culture change coming through in racing, or if it's still this, bigger is better kind of American mentality.
From my perspective, I feel as though that big displacement, got to have the fastest thing on track, has died off some. I would say not even all that long ago that was still kind of the mentality. But I think the bikes in that class, that 1000cc motorcycle, they make. I mean, we're talking about numbers that used to be impressive for MotoGP that these bikes are making stock, and that's pretty wild. I mean, I'm not Valentino Rossi. I can't get on a 200 horsepower motorcycle and go put down lap record times in that class. It's not me. Can I get out on a lightweight bike and be competitive and probably get at the front? Yeah, I mean, I'm not the fastest guy, but I could get there, and most people would say the same thing. And I think the reality is that people are seeing that. They're seeing how expensive a 1000cc bike is to buy and then build. I mean, a lot of the 1000cc motorcycles are, out of the box. If you're buying new, again, I like to talk new as an example versus used, but you're going to buy a whatever $17,000 new motorcycle, and that's just the beginning. You got to put bodywork on, you got to put exhaust on, and you got to put everything else you're going to do to that motorcycle. Before you know it, and I can speak to many people I spoke with on 1000cc bikes, it's easy to get into a 1000cc super bike. And that's just the reality. And then to get on that 200 horsepower machine and go out there and do the thing, it's challenging. That's a lot to chew off in a lot of different ways. So I feel like the rise of lightweight bikes, and even below that 300 class is a good thing. It's giving more people the opportunity to get in the sport at a affordable price point, at a safer rider skill level, or just a general safer experience. And I think it's better for the sport as a whole. How Kramer slots in with all of it, of course, Evo 2 fits in against the twins well. Its power to weight ratio and its overall performance index is right in line with most of the FZ07s or SV650s or what have you. I mean, we've all seen it. If you've been on a track with a Kramer, you kind of can tell that they slot right in there real well. And yeah, we're fortunate that class has been well attended. And it's been a very active class pretty much across the United States. We don't really have too many lightweight grids that are really small. Most of them are pretty well attended, so that's a huge plus, which is good for us, of course, but it's good for the sport. It's good to see people getting out there, whether it's on a relatively stock SV650 or FZ07 that they just put race bodywork on and put a pipe on it and maybe do a little fork work in a shock. That's great. I'm glad to see people doing that, and if that's where they're at from getting into the sport level, that's great, because I just want people out there, racing and riding on track. So, it's great to be able to slot in with that, though.
I want to take a minute to prompt our viewers to get some questions in the comments, and we'll start hitting on those. But we're kind of running towards. I think we're going to run long on this one, Joe, if that's okay with you.
That's all right. I've got time.
All right. I do like this. That's what I like to hear. I've trained you well. There's an interesting question here from Yoshi HNS, because he's asking about the upcoming 490 motor from KTM. He's talking about it being a single, but I believe it's going to be a parallel twin. And whether or not there's look at that. Look at the definitive answer from you right there. There's a little inside scoop. Obviously, you know something about this motor, but I'm curious. He's asking if this is a power plant that could end up in a future Kramer, and I'll kind of follow up with my own question of, what does bike number 3 from Kramer look like? Is it a 1290 type bike? Is it a 350, 250 single? Where's the next white space on the board for you guys to fill?
Well, I'll start with the
and understand I make my money on scoops. I need stories.
Well, I know enough to be dangerous on the topic, but I'll reserve a little bit just so I don't get it wrong. But yes, it is going to be a new drivetrain from KTM. We all kind of know that, and it will be a twin, unless they pull a fast one on me and change that. But everything, of course, that we've seen has been a parallel twin, and of course we see a little bit more than most. But it's going to be a much different engine. It's going to more align with the 390. And if people have experience with 390, they might understand where I'm coming from on that. And it's built to a target and to a demographic and to a geographical location where the 390 is.
Let me translate for everyone watching. The 390 is a budget focused motor that's made in India that has a reputation for not being terribly reliable on a racetrack.
I'll leave it at that. Now, I don't want to say that, of course, the new drivetrain will not be good. Our partnership with KTM is extremely good, and I don't want to make anybody upset. We'll put it that way. But it's going to be a different application. That motor is for mass market, and it's not quite the thoroughbred that we're used to working with the 690. So we're excited to see what that will be and what will come of it. And would we write it off as a no? No, definitely not. I mean, I think we're always very extremely open-minded at what we have for opportunities in front of us. That's one of the benefits of being a small company is we're able to make moves quickly when it comes to new paths or new ideas or new projects. And so it's a maybe, but odds are, knowing what we know now, it may not be the direction we go. Of course, with the bumpy road we've had getting our new GB2 to marketplace, it hasn't got to where we wanted yet, but that's our bike 2. Now bike 3, we've got things in the works. We've got a few irons in the fire. Yeah, I know. Well, what I can say is that it will be a little time before you see anything new from Kramer Motorcycles. We are working hard to make sure that we are making our new 890 everything that it can be. So it's going to be some time before you see anything new from us, but not saying we aren't working on things. We are looking at multiple ends of the spectrum from smaller displacement. That is something that I personally have been pushing on extremely hard within the company, saying I would love to see something between that 250 and 500 cc single. I can't say anything too specific because we don't really have any hardcore plans. We have some preliminary ideas and some preliminary engineering, but nothing that's gotten too many legs on it. But some of the other things is looking at alternative drivetrain options, such as electric. That's a space that we're exploring slightly, as some may have seen some partnerships that we've been doing kind of on the down low, if you will. Not really, but we haven't promoted it, obviously, because we're just exploring the option of electric propulsion and seeing what that looks like, what it means for the consumer, how would a consumer use it, how do you charge the thing, and where does it slot in at? I mean, as you said earlier, we're good at doing things a little bit different, so it's within our design ethos, that's for sure. But that is an ongoing project that we're just at this point exploring the technology on. So there'll be more to come, but right now our main concentration, like I said, is to make the 890 everything that it can be.
The electric proposition is an interesting one, and for those who don't know, because Joe's really bad at plugging people, that's the Light Fighter project that Brian Wiesman's been spearheading. He's a person at Zero Motorcycles that my colleague Troy Seahan has been racing quite successfully. That's a really interesting project, and it's truthfully, I think that's a niche that fits Kramer quite well, because I think I've had the chance to ride the Moto E race bike, and it's big, it's heavy, but it makes good power, and it makes good power over a long duration of time, where you could go out. I rode it at Valencia, and our session was close to 20 minutes, and we had full power for the whole time, and it was a lot of fun. And okay, she's a big girl, and you have to wrestle her around a pretty tight track, but it gets the gears kind of clicking where you're like, this could work as a track day bike. If you have a facility that can charge it, you could go out, ride 20 minutes full pace, charge for 40, and maybe the way things arbitrage over the course of that first half of the day, you have to do a full charge during lunch, but you could conceivably have a track day there on an electric bike, or even better, you could have a race day on an electric bike and make it have a lot of sense. And considering how kind of focused and niche your guys' business is, looking at, just catering to only track day enthusiasts and only racers, there's a really good business proposition there that makes a lot of sense. I'd be really curious to see how that pans out.
Yeah, no, we're extremely excited about that project. Brian has really led that project through and through, and he's done a brilliant job. The Light Fighter V1, as people have seen out there in the wild, is things fast. I mean, if you've seen it on track, it is no joke, and Troy has really shown what that thing can do. And I don't want to say it too much. I don't want his head to get too big, but
no, we can't have that. He's to be fair, he's one of the factory Kramer endurance riders, and probably the most insufferable to be around because of his inflated ego that you constantly are building up. That's a joke, by the way. It's a joke. We love Troy. Just for those that aren't clear.
Yeah, exactly. No,
he's like the little brother I never wanted.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it's pretty spot on. No, he's great. Anyways, but yeah, no, Troy has campaigned that motorcycle on to do some pretty amazing things, and we'll do so on version 2. We are excited to see what version 2 comes to be, and again, 100% credit goes to Brian and Eli spearheading that project.
That's right. Can't forget Eli.
They are totally carrying that flag, but we're excited to be a part of it and be associated with it and help in any way that we can to help develop the concept, because really that's what we come at it from is we want to look and see what does road racing look like in 10 years, and that is something that we know as a company is going to change. And does that mean we're going to be the guys out front? I don't know. Time will tell. But when it comes to that technology, I want to, and the company wants to know as much as we can to be ready for a potential change in the industry, or be ready for a new alternative for road racing. And we've proven, and Brian and Eli have proven, and Troy piloting have shown that bike can go out there, win races, and recharge in time to go do another one. Most time it's doing 2 to 3 races a day at 20-minute races at full power. And so, of course, this is completely a prototype motorcycle. So all these specs are arbitrary, but to anything production, but approximately 380 pounds. Brian's going to be mad if I said that wrong. And probably around that 120 horsepower range. And I'm not even going to say how many torques because I'll get it wrong and he'll be mad at me, but a lot of torque. So much
all the torques.
It has all the torques, and in a way that is really impressive. I have a very awesome video from Barber Motorsports Park last year where Troy took off with the thing, and I've never seen a sport bike take the tire sticker and imprint it every 4 feet off the start, not spin the wheel, just tear the sticker off into the asphalt, so much so as you could see the white dots as it drove away on the asphalt, and immediately went from, like, I don't know, third, fourth row to the front before turn 1 at Barber Motorsports Park. And if anybody's been on that track, it's not a long ways to go to get out front. And so it's pretty impressive where that technology has come and where it's going, because the version 1 was a older design ethos in a way. The batteries and the controller and all that stuff was a little older tech, but with a better chassis in mind. And so version 2 is going to be just that much better, and we're excited to see where that leads, and in the future where that might lead with Kramer. Of course, that's all up in the air. We don't know necessarily, but we're exploring the tech and excited to be part of the project.
I want to circle back for a second, because before we got down this kind of tangent with electrics, we were talking about the 490 twin and kind of what that's going to look like when it finally comes out. What's interesting to me, and I've heard this from you and I've heard this from others, is that 690 motor, that single, is really a piece of art in terms of its design. Yes. And I've had conversations with KTM about, especially when the 790 motor was coming out, it's like, well, how are you going to have the 690 and the 790 living in the same environment? And they're like, well, that 690 is for a special buyer, but it has to be built in Austria. It's too complex. The metallurgy is too complex to make. The tolerances are too tight. This is not a mass market motor, let's say. That's probably a bad way of putting it, but it's a limited volume motor. Yeah. Whereas the 790 was designed to be built in India, built in China. It's going to service a wide platform of bikes. It's already in the adventure bike. It's already in a Duke. We'll probably see it in some sort of supermoto long travel suspension. And then who knows what else KTM has cooking on this. But for now, that's a motor that's still being built in Austria. They're very tight with their controls. They're trying to walk before they can run. But we know that future iterations will come from other markets. And so I guess the question I have for you, Kramer is so dependent on what KTM does. This is a component of your business that is outside of your control in a lot of ways. So how do you plan for that? How do you factor that in?
Well, we rely on KTM, of course, to supply us with the best products possible. I'd say the 690, as you said, is a piece of work. It's a piece of art. The thing is beautifully machined. It's really the best single cylinder, most durable single cylinder motorcycle engine you could probably envision.
Yeah, I think the epitaph is that is the most powerful single cylinder engine ever produced for a motorcycle. 4-stroke, I should say.
Yeah, no, for sure. I don't think there's any doubt of that. It's pretty impressive, but it takes some amazing engineering and quality and quality control to make that happen. Now, with increasing the volume of production with the 790 and the 890, KTM is relying on their partners and their manufacturing resources outside of Austria, and there's been problems in the past. We all know that, but KTM has learned from those mistakes and is pushing to resolve those problems, and they will, and they have. The bikes have gotten better. Some of the bikes that they were building outside of their original factory have improved. I'll say the 390 as an example. Your early 390s had some major growing pains. The later ones are much better. They're maybe not still without their faults, but that is a bike built to a much lower price point though too. So I will kind of give it a small pass in that sense. Now with the 890 and 790 and 890 platform, that is truly more of a flagship level product. And so they're still doing it in a way that's the most economical, from a global manufacturing standpoint, but they're holding it to I would say a higher standard of sorts, because that bike is going global, and it is kind of a flagship bike for them. I know the 1290 Super Duke is their flagship, but for the most people, they're going to look at that 890 before they're going to look at a 1290. So I anticipate that KTM is going to put forth a drivetrain is going to be, reliable and competitive and just well made in general. So doesn't scare us too much by any means. We believe in their engineering, and we work closely with them too, because you have to remember Marcus did work there for quite some time, and the factory is I mean, I've made the drive. I don't even want to say it's 30 minutes away from Kramer Motorcycles to KTM's front door. And so that's that close working relationship makes sure that anything that might come up with any issues doesn't fall through the cracks. We're usually up to speed on things rather quickly. So we're not too concerned, I guess, at that point.
I'll give just a last call for our viewers on YouTube to get their comments in or their questions before we wrap things up. But I like where Yoshi's head's at, because he's asking about 2-strokes. 2-stroke bike in the future for KTM, or is it 4 strokes only for now?
Well, that has been a interesting topic of conversation actually a couple times. And KTM as a company they build some amazing 2-strokes, but they build 2-strokes designed for a very different purpose. And they are very limited in their capacity for a road race bike. If you start stacking the specs against, let's say, an older 250 GP bike, a two-stroke GP bike, or even a 125 two-stroke GP bike of older days, none of the current drivetrains that are available really stack up for the horsepower per displacement. So we kind of looked at them. Everybody had a deep breath of nostalgia of two-stroke smoke, and thought it'd be super cool. But at this time, I don't think there's any viability to any of the two-stroke options for Kramer. Though the old school dirt biker in me would be pretty excited about it. But right now, probably not so much.
I mean, the 350th direct injection, I could get excited about that.
The 300 TPI.
300, sorry, yeah.
Yep, 300 TPI. It's brilliant. It's a great drivetrain. It doesn't make a whole lot of peak horsepower, though. It makes a ton of torque. So it's tuned very differently than what we need on a road race course, and we need something that makes a lot of peak horsepower and not so much peak torque. Not saying it couldn't work. Don't get me wrong, we could build a pretty lightweight and a pretty fast motorcycle with it, but there is, and I've read a lot of the rule books. If we have a hard time finding where the 890 is going to race in, we'd have a really hard time figuring out where to put a 200 two-stroke. So it's pretty challenging. So.
Well, I just have one last question that was emailed in from a Bradley Kreller. He's wanting to know if there's going to be any Kramer swag and where his sweatshirt is.
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, there is going to be Kramer swag. And as for his sweatshirt, I think he finally figured out how to get it. Just asked me live on TV, and looks like Brad's going to get a sweatshirt now. So
I think
if anybody wants a sweatshirt, send me an email.
I think it's over in turn 3 where I saw him crash during a certain endurance race.
Yeah, exactly. That could be very true. Yeah.
Joe, I think that just about does us for this one, but I want to thank you for coming on the show and chatting bikes with me. It's been really interesting to get to know the Kramer brand over the last, I don't know, what's it been, like 2 years now?
But yeah, I guess it's been that long.
But I'm trying to spread the good gospel about the Kramer motorcycle. It's an interesting motorcycle. It's interesting what you guys are doing, and man, you guys are really doing it the hard way sometimes, which is fun to watch.
Hey, it's all right to be different, though.
No, it is, and that's truthfully, in a few conversations that I've had with some let's say maybe future owners, it is the interesting side of it that gets the attention. That's truthfully one of the things that brought me to it, was this idea of like, this isn't the same bike that everyone else is. It's not another SV650. It's not another FZ07. Yeah. Our club has a lot of cripple triples. So we have a lot of cripple triples. It's not another one of those. It's something that's a little bit different, and it's a different tool in the toolbox. And it's been really impressive to see what that tool can do. And to your credit, I'll give you just a little fanning of the ego. It's amazing to me the level of support that you're able to provide racers like myself and Troy and all the others that have bought Kramers, from being such a small company, because I go and I look at, from my seat as a journalist, and see what other brands are doing in this space. And there's some that are doing, really high level jobs, and there's others that are doing well below what the standard is that you guys are doing. And I would say you're quite closer to the top than most. And that's really impressive. And I think that's part of the success that you guys are having, is that after sales side of it. And if there's one lesson that, any of the manufacturers can learn from watching this video, maybe, is how important that is to selling motorcycles in the United States.
I lost you there for a second, Jensen. I lost a little bit of that, but
that's good. That's fine. You don't need to know all the nice things I said about you.
I say, yeah, I think that I caught just enough of it to realize that, yeah, I probably didn't need to hear all of it. But no, thank you. I do appreciate that. And we, not saying we didn't or we don't, drop the ball periodically or make mistakes or what have you, but we try to do our best. Not just myself, but everybody involved from Mardels here in the U.S. We're all extremely dedicated, and we believe in what we're doing. And we try to do what we can, and sometimes it's too much to juggle. I won't lie. There's days where my to-do list is way too long, and I apologize to anybody that I might miss out on here and there. But I want everybody to know that we're really a dedicated crew, and we want to see not only Kramer do well, but the industry as a whole do well.
Well, I'll say it again. Thank you for coming on the show, and wish you the best of luck as you guys go forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Jensen.
Oh, yeah, sure. You betcha.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, guys.